is a chiyuv, maybe midrabanan, at least according to the majority of the Rishonim. Shemitah Bismana says is a chiyuv midrabanan, because as Rav Kook has pointed out to us, the chiyuv of Shemitah min haTorah is a din only bisman sha'yovel noeg, which means that you require to be able to lead up to a yovel, which means that you have to have Rov Yeshvel, you have to have the majority of the Jewish people living in Eretz Yisrael, knowing where their ancestral homeland is. So we don't have that bisman hazeh, which means that our Shemitah bisman hazeh is not mid'oraisa. What Rav Kook is describing here is what Shemitah is supposed to be. What's it supposed to be? What was the idea of the Torah in giving us this mitzvah called Shemitah and Yovel? That's what we've discussed. What did it do for us? What did that culture and what did that world look like? Much of what Rav Kook has been trying to do for us so far is to paint the picture of a world that none of us have ever seen with our eyes. Right? We've never lived in a world where Shemitah and Yovel exist as part of a socio-economic religious system. We've never been there. We've never done that. We've never seen it. Even Shemitah Bisman Hazeh, even those that are keeping Shemitah Kilchasa and letting their field lie fallow are Yechidim. They're individuals. They are not part of a collective movement of Klal Yisrael in Eretz Yisrael that are living in a particular way. That's not happening today. So Rav Kook is trying to paint a picture for us, and much of what he is attempting to do is to share that picture in a way that we might be able to appreciate a piece of what this is. Because you read the psukim in, Parshas Bahar, there's a chiv Shemitah, there's a chiv Yovel, and you go, shkoyach. Right? Okay, that's the din. You can pick up the Mishnayos and you can learn some Mishnayos and you'll figure out what the halachas are. Which, as we mentioned many weeks back, is exactly the same thing as handing somebody, a Shmir Shabbos Kel Chasa, like a breakdown of Hilchas Shabbos, and telling them, now do you understand why we love Shabbos so much? Right? Now you understand what Shabbos does for us? No. That's right. So Rav Kook is trying to give us a emotional experience in words. We can't experience Shemitah and Yovel because we are not living in that world. It is not just mitzvahs that now you mekayim the mitzvah of Shemitah. Much like he tried to explain to you learn the Mishnayos in Gittin and Ksubas and Kiddushin. We just hit Seder Nashim in the Daf. You try to explain. You're learning the Mishnayos of Kiddushin with a 9-year-old boy. So he knows all the Mishnayos of Kiddushin. You faher him on it, and he understands it. And they say to him, "Nu, so what's your opinion of marriage? What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Nu, kid, what do you think?" So he goes, "I don't even know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about." There's a story. I'll tell you good myself. The Alter Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe's successor was his son. Knew any Chabadnikim in the room? Knew after the Alter Rebbe was? The Mittler Rebbe. The Mittler Rebbe, Dov Ber. The Mittler Rebbe was became Rebbe after the Alter Rebbe. The Mittler Rebbe was far more private and esoteric in many ways. The Mittler Rebbe, his Gabbai would pick him up in the middle of Shemona Esrei and take him around the Beis Medrash, so that the Hasidim could see what kind of kavanah the Rebbe had. He didn't know. He was in kavanah salamas alyanim. He had no idea that he was show and tell. Take the Rebbe around the Beis Medrash. Nobody knew. I mean, he knew, but he didn't feel that he was being schlepped around. By the way, that's not just by tzaddikim from generations past. Rav Shechter told me once that Rav Soloveitchik used to daven Shemona Esrei like a little bit out loud. Like if you stood next to him, you could hear the words that he was saying. So Rav Shechter said that there was one Rosh Chodesh that Rav Soloveitchik was in the middle of Shemona Esrei, and the guys next to him could hear him, beginning Ritzei and then going straight to V'sach Zeno and skipping Yalav V'Yavo. So one of the guys that was next to him says Yalav V'Yavo. And the Rav keeps on davening. And then he says a little bit louder, Yalav V'Yavo. So keeps on davening and goes, Rosh Chodesh. Keeps going. And then got to Moedim, finished Shemona Esrei, took 3 steps back. It's very awkward. So, like, what are you supposed to do now? So one of the other, I think it was one of the other Rebbeim in the yeshiva said, Rebbe, today's Rosh Chodesh. He goes, so how come nobody told me to say Yalav Yavah? He was talking to the Rebbeinu Shalom. There was nothing to break up the conversation. He was talking to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Didn't hear, didn't see, okay. So the Mittler Rebbe, back to the first one, I say, this is the problem. When you start telling stories, you tell stories within stories within stories. No, we're Jewish. So the Mittler Rebbe got married a young man in his early teens, as was the minhag of Jews in Russia at that point in time. That's how you avoided conscription. So he was getting married, but his father, the Alter Rebbe, sat him down and learned through all of the halachas of marriage and all of the Chassidus and Kabbalah of marriage. And in the Elamas of Kabbalah, so Ish means something, and Isha means something, and Zivug means something, and Abba and Ima. Yeah, all of these words mean big, lofty ideas in Chassidus. And they get to the chasana, and he's standing on the chuppah, and the kala is walking down the aisle, and the Mittler Rebbe, young man at the time, has all of the Chassidus and Kabbalah and all of the halachas of marriage in his head, of like Isha Niknes and all of the Torah. And he looks at his father, he goes, oh my gosh, what do you mean? He goes, that's an Isha? Like, what? He wasn't a fool, obviously. I mean, that's an Isha? Meaning, to try to take all of those ideas and turn it into this is the practical, real thing. So that's the world. That's what we're doing. So what Rav Kook has been trying to give to us here is, what did it feel like to be there? What was that emotional, intellectual, spiritual, cultural, national, sociological, psychological experience of living in a world of Yisrael Shurim al Admasam V'Nenem Ziva Shechina, the Jewish people living the way we're supposed to live, with sovereignty and with safety, and with the empathy to be able to grow and to be able to experience the capitalistic drive of growing an economy, and also take a step back and be able to say, whoa, hold up a minute, I don't want this to overrule my natural sensitivity to other Jews, be able to do that. And then every 49 years to get to a point where it's like, okay, and now we can reset the mistakes of the last 2 generations. That whole world, that's what Rav Kook has been trying to download into our hearts and minds in the Sakdama. Say what?
That won't happen only once.
Yes, and we're aiming to get back there.
What I mean is, how many years did they keep?
Not many.
They didn't give Shemitahs.
Yeah, well, Shemitahs. Well, the second half of the Bayis Rishon already were tough. Yeah. Right. As Ratzah Eretz Shabbos Esau, that's part of the Klolish, right? Then the land will finally get its Shemitahs. But 70 years.
70 Shemitahs.
Yeah.
70 times 70 is 490 years. It's the whole Bayis Sheni practically.
Well, no, Bayis Rishon was 410, but meaning 410 years. But
this started even before Bayis Rishon.
Yeah, so that they kept Shemitah in the days of Shlomo Melech, yeah, Pasha that they did. But exactly how that works out is a good question, not for now. But past this is, Rav Kook is sharing this with us not because of what was, but because what should be and what we are aiming to get back to. That's the goal. We're supposed to be, meaning Geula means this experience, getting to a point where we can live in this way. Here, Chaim. That's what we're aiming for. That's what the goal of this entire project is, of getting back to a point where we can live in this way. No. He's explaining the practical effect of a physical, practical, halachic experience, what that does to your culture, what that does to your mindset, what that does to the way that you live your life. The same way that you take somebody that has never kept Shabbos before, that has never heard of Shabbos before, and then you tell them, Hilchos Shabbos, they'll say, Shkoyach. Okay, now I know Hilchos Shabbos. What does Shabbos do for your life? So a lot. Shabbos does a tremendous amount to your life. Your entire life is a different life if you're Shomer Shabbos. It's not a detail, it's transformative. Right? It's not a detail in life. Shabbos is not like, oh, by the way, every 7 days I don't work. The entirety of Shabbos, that thing called Shabbos that exists in your life is not a detail, it's everything. Meaning, like, somebody says to you, by the way, I don't like chicken. So that's a detail, that's a prat, right? So every now and then that'll affect, like, you know, you got to a chasana, and, like, you know, they're serving chicken and they ran out of the meat thing, and okay, so now he's annoyed. So, like, you know, once in a yovel, it like practically affects his life. You get on the El Al flight, and they say chicken or beef, and he says beef, and they go, no more beef. But they always ask, even when they've run out, right? They always ask, chicken or beef? Beef. No, we don't have more beef. Okay. So now he's annoyed. Fine, right? Fine, I'll have the chicken. No, we don't have chicken either. We're sorry. We can offer you a challah roll. So what? Yeah. Hey, we'll take whatever you can get. Okay, fine. So you don't like chicken. That's a detail. But you keep Shabbos. That's your whole life is now different. Wednesday's a different Wednesday when you keep Shabbos. Thursday's a different Thursday when you keep Shabbos. The Ramban says, by the way, that is a kiyum din de'iraisa, shir shel yom, every morning. Hayom yom rishon b'Shabbos. That's a kiyum din de'iraisa. You're fulfilling which mitzvah de'iraisa? Zachar Yom HaShabbos. Zachar Yom HaShabbos. Yeah. Right? So that's a kiyum. That's the Ramban. That's a kiyum of a mitzvah de'iraisa. This is what Rav Kook is trying to give to us. Now, we are on page Yud Gimel, over here in the middle. What we described last time was the bettering of Jewish people from generation to generation as the result of being in a state of healthy, God-infused living. Says Rav Kook as follows: Oila hi ha'uma barum ma'alusa ela k'shehi ma'keres es rucha ha'atzmi. The Jewish people can only achieve all of this greatness when we recognize our unique spiritual identity. There's a piece of identity and recognition that everything rests on. Historical piece to this. Rav Kook is talking in a world that we are well familiar with, but Rav Kook was at the beginning parts of it, where identifying as being special as a result of being a Jew made you questionable to European society. Meaning, what do you think? You're better than us? So to be a frum Jew meant to be simultaneously backwards and outdated and old-fashioned, and also untrustworthy because you think that you're better than us. We know the Christian enlightened world would say, we know that you're worse than us, but you think you're better than us, so we don't like you on 2 counts. So the entirety of the movement of Jews to modernize, to westernize, to become more acceptable, more palatable to the European world, was to deny the natural proclivity of a Jew to cleave to godliness, was to try contain that, to try put it in a box, meaning we'll go to universities, but also be Shomer Shabbos. We'll also be Shomer Kashas. By the way, you've all experienced this in your life, every single person here, I have no doubt. If you've ever sat in a board meeting or a business meeting or like a lunch meeting where they brought you your food on a different tray and you felt bad about that, you felt like you put it in their mouth and like they're accommodating you and like that's nice and you appreciate it, but like you feel bad for being different. That feeling, that's what Rav Kook is talking about here. Where we feel that that which makes us different is not so good. I mean, we're happy to be Avdei Hashem, we're Simcha Rabbah, Ribbon Shalom, you're the Melech, we're the Eved, Beseda. But like, could you make it like a little less embarrassing sometimes? Say what? Right. Right. Just a little bit, right? But I mean, we love being Jewish. It's great. But when it's very clear that like not only is there 17 layers of aluminum foil, but there's also, it's the gift that keeps on giving, it's the stickers. The stickers, and then finally when you get to it, the peas are burning hot, but the chicken is still frozen. Poshet. That's how it goes. That's Minig Yisrael. Says Rav Kook like this. He says, "Ha'akara zu hi mevia isa la'ater begoydel levav b'seiras elokim asher imada." Once we recognize it, it helps us to feel the grandeur of it. Of the word what? To crown. To crown. Atara. Miloshan atara. Yes. Yes. But you see it with both. Yeah. So he says, it is that which allows us to ride over the world, to skip over the mountains. And in as much as our surrounding environment, and this is all of our lives, this is certainly Rav Kook's life, and as much as our surrounding culture, bilti mukhsharim, is not prepared for appreciating the uniqueness of the Jewish people, or is actively in opposition to that. Ruach Yisrael shayif elal, that which the Jewish people is striving towards. We should not be caught up in those traps. We should continue in the path that the Ribbon Shalom wants us to have. Rav Kook is cognizant and recognizing the fact that recognizing the unique, special nature of the Jewish people as being Atem adveikim al Hashem Elokeichem, that is not what the world wants from us. It is not what is palatable to our society. When a Jew says, "I'm a proud Jew," that is viewed with skepticism and often anti-Semitism. What are you so proud about, Jew? Why are you so excited about being Jewish? Say what?
Are you implying that if they will stand out, there will be anti-Semitism?
No, that's not what he's saying. He's saying, of course, there's anti-Semitism. And that convinces people not to be proud about being Jewish. We feel bad about being Jewish. He says, but we should be cognizant of the fact that we will never be able to achieve more for as long as that's our reality. For as long as we are ashamed of being Jewish, we will not be able to achieve our personal, communal, national, religious, sociological goals. So he says, once we are living in a way of being proud of being Jewish, he says, as ta'orer es skulas tiv'ah, then we will awaken within ourselves the specialness of our nature, as hoid chel b'chirasa achara, the beauty of our choice, of the strength of the choices that we make. We choose and we are excited about our choices. We don't feel bad about choosing to be a frum Jew. We don't feel bad about that. So he says, "Hashmita va'yovel yachtav yutamim al reisha ve'haaretz ta'aneh le'umasa b'cheila haruchani ha'atzur b'kirba hamas'im lechedvas hashmita v'rinnas hayovel." The poetry of these words we'll leave for a moment. We'll describe what he's saying and then we'll explain what this means. We noted before that the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, there are certain realities that are almost resonant frequencies within existence. Like, if you take a tuning fork, and then you have another tuning fork that's at the same key, and one is vibrating, what happens to the other one? It'll vibrate as well. Have you ever seen that? It's a tremendous thing. If you take two tuning forks that are the same shape, the same key, you bang one, it'll be vibrating. You hold another one, it will vibrate with the same resonant frequency. It's an incredible thing. The same thing exists in the Bria in general, that you have this from time to time, that somebody will start singing a particular song, and then like a couple of hours later, you'll be humming that song, right? I think psychologists call that an earworm, right? It's something that like now is just, it's sitting in your head. It's resonating within your brain. You hear ideas all the time. Some that you dismiss out of hand. Obviously, that is sheker v'chosov, it makes no sense to my life. I don't understand it at all. It is not true within the way that I understand the world. And then sometimes you'll hear an idea that'll just be at the edge of what you understand and know, and then you get really excited because you now have a piece of information that now resonates with everything else that you experience. There's those resonant frequencies that exist within the world. The same thing, by the way, is true in the world of the material sciences, natural sciences. There's certain things that almost are yearning to be expressed in a particular way, and there's some things that you have to kind of coerce into being that way. So there's some metals, for example, that are incredibly malleable. You want to mold them into a particular shape, and they do beautifully. Gold and silver, for example, are beautifully malleable. And then you have other metals that are really, really not. You can force it, but then there's this tension between how far can I push it until the point that it's not going to break. There's certain things that resist those kinds of changes. Certain elements within the world that you feel when you engage with them, this is the task that it is best for. It's reaching its fullest potential in this way, or it's at least reaching a level of potential in this way, even if not fullest, and we'll talk about that chiluk in a few minutes. This thing is beautifully designed for this application, as opposed to things that are not. So there are certain lands, for example, that are perfect for growing the kind of grapes that make delicious wine. And then there's other land that is not that. And try as you may to grow delicious grapes to make delicious wine, it doesn't come out well. It's the wrong land. It's the wrong ground. It's great for wheat. It's not good for grapes. It's not good for those things. There's certain ways of working certain pieces of land or certain materials or certain relationships that yield produce, that yield healthy, good, happy produce. And then there's other land, other relationships, other ways of working that when you apply this particular kind of work to this particular kind of crop, it makes everything go bad. It worked great for the wheat. Why doesn't it work great for the grapes? Well, because grapes and wheat are not the same thing, and this land and this kind of work don't work out well in those things. You understand the mashal that we're building here? Eretz Yisrael is a land that works best when Klal Yisrael is doing what we are doing. It's before the Gemara in Brachas, famous Meimer of Shmuel, that the Siman of Geula is that Eretz Yisrael is giving forth its peiros. Eretz Yisrael gives forth its peiros. The resonant frequency of Eretz Yisrael, how does it yield its best produce? To Klal Yisrael that's being Shomer Torah mitzvahs. That's what makes Eretz Yisrael wake up. Klal Yisrael working the land in accordance with Torah and mitzvahs. That's what brings forth that fruit. Now, can you fetch out of the land produce without doing all of that? Yes, it is possible. You can fetch it out, but it's a kvetch. It's a squeeze. It doesn't, in Hebrew they say it's not zorem. It doesn't flow. It's not working well. So you can pull it out, but the land resists it. You feel that resistance. You feel that it's not working well for you. So says Rav Kook, once we are living in a world of Shemitah and Yovel, so this is mat'im lechedvas hashmita v'rinanas hayovel. The land responds to the joy of Shemitah, to the celebration that is Yovel. The land responds to that. It brings forth that fruit. And so he says like this. This is what the Torah means. Parshas Bahar, it's coming up in a few weeks, in the Parsha of Shemitah, that if you will keep Shemitah, v'tzivisi es birkasi lachem b'shana hashishis, then I will command my bracha in that 6th year, v'asa es hatvua l'shlois hashonim, and then the land will yield 3 years worth of crop in 1 year. How are you going to have enough to eat in Shemitah? Because the land responds to Shemitah. If you observe Shemitah, the land lives in response to your observance. That's how Hashem made Eretz Yisrael. You keep Shemitah, it will resonate with successful crop. That's how the land works. And then he quotes from the pasuk, "Yirafu na'is midbar vigil givais givais tachgarna lov shukarim hatzain ve'amakim yatvu bar yisrayu af yoshiru," which is the pasuk in Tehillim, that once we are living the way that we are supposed to, so then there'll be beauty within the desert, and the hilltops are going to celebrate. And Lav Shukarim Matzon, that the hilltops will be filled. There's two ways to understand the pasuk. The hilltops will be filled with sheep, or the sheep will be plentiful with wool. The amakim yatfu bar, and the valleys will be filled with crop. And everything is going to just sing out to the Ribbon Shalom. The land is just going to... There's a famous Torah of Reb Nachman Breslov where Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Meraglim, "Ve'lochu mi zimra sa'aretz." You should take from the Zmeira. What's Zmeira mean? To be Zomer is... Yeah, what is Zmira? This is a din in Shemitah. Right? So what does it mean? Lizmar means to prune, to clip, clippings of grapes. Also, yes. So Mizimra Sa'aretz, Rav Nachman has a whole Torah in Likutei Moharan. You should take Mizimra Sa'aretz, means from the yield of the land, but it's also from the song of the land. This is Af Yoshiru, that the world is going to sing. Everything is going to harmonize with Klal Yisrael being Shomer Torah mitzvahs. But now Rav Kook describes the opposite, which is the world of not living with Jewish pride. Jewish pride meaning being Shomer Torah mitzvahs and being happy about being Shomer Torah mitzvahs. He says, "Kshe umema b'Yisrael hakaros haruach ha'atzmi, zanach Yisrael toiv, shachach es uzay v'ga'avasai." When that recognition of the uniqueness of the Jewish people becomes foggy, becomes cloudy, zanach Yisrael toiv, the Jewish people has denied the goodness that is within us. We've forgotten our strength and our Jewish pride. Hamabat hachitzoni ala sviva harchava habilti mifutachas. That perspective, that view of the world that is around us, the world at large, that is undeveloped, that is underdeveloped, that is primitive. Hafri'is b'tiv'a u'v'chirasa gam yachad, that is disturbing both in its nature and in its choices. Hishkiach mimeno es gdulas sgulasai, we forget the importance, the greatness of our uniqueness. We become influenced by a society that views being Jewish as being not a good thing, and that is both in terms of the choices of the world around us and the nature of the world around us. There's an important point to note here that Rav Kook is alluding to in the words "betiv'ah u'v'chirasa," because the non-Jewish world around us sometimes makes choices that affect us very, very negatively. That is active, anti-Semitic, murderous. We've been through this for the last 2,000 years. We've experienced this for the last 2,000 years. But then there is also something which is not an active choice, but it is by nature. There is a nature, and this is not saying Chalila. Rav Kook is not saying Chalila, that non-Jews are evil. What he is saying is that by nature, the culture that surrounds us is antithetical to the unique nature of a Jew. This is Chazal in many places, and Rashi al Torah in many places, that living in Chutz La'aretz, kol hadar b'chutz La'aretz, ki'ilu ein la Eloka. It's as if you don't have a God. Or kol hadar b'chutz La'aretz, oyved avodah zarah b'tahara. You are an oved, us. We are ovdei avodah zarah b'tahara. What does that mean, b'tahara? Sanitized, sanctioned. Sanitized avodah zarah. You know what sanitized avodah zarah is? So when you go into the kosher Dunkin' Donuts, Olav Shalom, it used to be, we used to have one here, Olav Shalom, the Dunkin' Donuts. When you go into a kosher Dunkin' Donuts around Chanukah time, and you hear jingle bells. Yes? Glad kosher, everything's kosher. Kosher v'yosher, but jingle bells is on the radio. Why? Because that's the culture. That's the culture that you live in. That is antithetical to Hanukkah. It's not Hanukkah. It's not a choice that somebody chose to be mean to a Jew. It's not a bechira that made it like that. It's the world around us is not in line with being Jewish. It's hard to be a Yid. So you feel different all the time. You don't feel that this is your culture. Lemashal, we talk about the idea of, this is big adult, about the mergers of the world of Torah and Mada, and Torah and Derech Eretz, Torah and Parnasa. In Eretz Yisrael, in the days of the first Beis Hamikdash, they didn't talk about Torah or Mada. They spoke about Mada, because Torah was everything. Torah was the whole world. So if you're learning science, right? If you're practicing the natural sciences and medicine and economy and in business, that's within the realm of being. Nobody talks about, in colleges today, they don't talk about how to be a doctor in an American culture. I mean, they can talk about the legalities of it. But there's not like a shiloh of like, how should we merge the world of being American and being a doctor? That doesn't exist. Because you're American. That's what the world is. You just are. Like, there's a famous mashal that they say of two young fish are swimming down the river, and an old fish comes to them and says to them, be careful, there's nets in the water down there. And then the fish swims away. And one fish looks at the other one and says, what's water? What's water? This is where we are. There's a world that is what? Meaning when Torah is your whole culture, you're not talking about like how to balance the priorities of being in a secular society and being a Shomer Torah. This is just your whole world is this. You have a hasaga of like what everything is, and then everything else that comes along just fits in. Or it doesn't fit in. Like, does this fit into my worldview of the world? Maybe, maybe not. Yeah, but it's easy. These things are easy. Those conversations, what comes in, what goes out of Yiddishkeit is very simple. As opposed to like everything has to be a din v'cheshbon. Does this fit into observant Judaism or does it not? When you live in a cultural reality of being a Jew, so everything is part of Yiddishkeit. Your Avodah Zarah is part of Yiddishkeit. Your Gila Arayis is part of Yiddishkeit. Your Shvichas Damim is part of Yiddishkeit. You have a Beis Din, a Sanhedrin that deals with those things. The world that we live in is antithetical to that by choice, anti-Semitism, but also by nature. It just is. We're not in the water, which, by the way, is exactly what Rabbi Akiva was saying. If you take me out of the water, I'm going to die. It's not me. I might live, but it's not me. It's not the same me. I'm not that. That's a different existence entirely. We are living, however, out of water. That's where we are. We're not in Eretz Yisrael, and we are not living in a world of Shomer Torah mitzvahs. Even Jews in Eretz Yisrael, are not fully there. But we're for sure not. This is partial. We are living in a world that is antithetical to that, which means that we are constantly needing to remind ourselves of the validity and the importance of being an Eved Hashem, being a Yid, being part of Klal Yisrael. Finishing off this line, he says, "Az hus'u min halev chukas ha'chaim ha'elokim," and then it was just lifted out of our souls, lifted out of our hearts, that desire to be connected to Elokim Chaim. Va'adanehem v'chemdas misaysam, and the enjoyment, the pleasure of being a Jew is stripped from us. V'chelam b'hiskal mam b'payal be'eretz ha'chaim, and all of the joy of working the land and yielding the fruit of that is stripped away without a recognition of who we are and what we're doing. It's this moment, by the way, lemashal, that you hear this, Rahman al-Islam, couples 40 years after marriage, and then the kids move out of the house, and husband and wife look at each other and go, we haven't really had a conversation in 40 years. And the relationship is like, well, why did we marry each other again? That. The Tirdas HaChaim, that life that just keeps going and going and going and going and going, like you didn't stop for a second to concretize the relationship. Says Rav Kook, that's our world. That's our world when we forget that we're connected to the Rebbeinu Shalom. And then it's not flowing anymore. It doesn't feel good. You don't enjoy it. You have to remind yourself, why are we here? What are we doing? This is the moment that a Jew in Eretz Yisrael would forget that. They'd be swamped by that culture, by the outside, not be able to sustain that ourselves, what our world is inside. And that's when things start to go poorly. And Be'ez Shem Yisbarach, we should have a Gevaldik Purim, and we'll continue between Purim and Pesach.